Your take on this election, will it ultimately be a referendum on Putin's war?
Yeah, Dan, good morning. I think your colleague Keir right there in Moscow was absolutely right. This is more like a referendum, or a plebiscite would be another word. It's a kind of yes-no answer to the Russian people. Should we go on our course under the leadership of President Putin? Just one bit of local color there. You probably saw, some of your viewers may have been surprised to see no trickle of voters into that polling station in Moscow behind the shot of Keir there. This reflects a change that historically elections in Russia have just been held on one day, like in many countries, but now they have voting over 3 days. And in big urban centers like Moscow, with mainly office workers, most people will vote on the traditional day, Sunday, the last day of voting. But you're right, your colleague was also, I think, absolutely right, that the turnout will be the key test for legitimacy of the re-elected president, Vladimir Putin, and I think that the Kremlin will be very keen to get a higher turnout or voter participation level than the last election in 2018, up from 67.5%. Of course, figures in Russia will be treated with some dose of skepticism internationally, but it'll be possible for local commentators, local analysis to establish more or less broad brush the reality. So we'll get an idea of whether the turnout is going up. My prediction, yes, I think that the Russian population as a whole, with the exception of a modest anti-war minority, we're talking, so say, a little over 10%, are mobilized and motivated to back President Putin for yet another term.
Christopher, are the dynamics of Putin's war shifting in his favor?
Well, it would have been controversial to answer your question, yes, a few months ago, because especially in Europe and North America, where opinion and also the governments greatly hope that Ukraine will manage to make progress in repelling this illegal, under international law, invasion by Russia of Ukraine. But it was already clear several months ago that the tide had turned in Russia's favor on the Ukrainian battlefield when Ukraine's counteroffensive in the central south of Ukraine and also on the eastern region of the Donbass was clearly making no progress. But now that switch has become absolutely clear, most obviously in the middle of last month when a heavily fortified Ukrainian stronghold in a town called Avdiivka in the east of the country in the Donbass region fell after a 4-month battle. The Ukrainian army is certainly not going to give up. There's been speculation that the whole Ukrainian front might collapse, and there is no sign of that at present. Despite that setback in Avdiivka, there is continued fierce resistance by Ukrainian forces along six parts of this huge 1,000-kilometer long front where the Russian forces are attacking. But it has to be doubted how long that resistance can hold unless two conditions are met. Huge new weapon supplies from the United States and Europe, which is a big problem. We were just discussing US politics related to the Middle Eastern conflict, Israel-Hamas, but it's also a very problematic US political situation in regard to the war in Ukraine. Europe just simply does not have the capacity at the moment to provide sufficient weaponry. And then the second thing is replenishing the depleted ranks of Ukrainians' armed forces. And a huge question has to be raised over whether the, even now, not fully legislated new mobilization plans of the Ukrainian government will be enacted and will be implemented. And if those two conditions are not met, well, it would be rash to predict a rapid end of the war. But the track record of this battle is that defenders have the advantage, but nevertheless, the outlook looks grim in a military sense, at least for Ukraine.